Well, greetings, amazing students, and I am so excited to have you back for this lesson today. So the topic of our lecture is going to focus on discrimination, prejudice, and bullying. And so, as you've noticed in your textbooks, or at least I hope you have at this point, there is actually a nice amount of information discussing the impact of discrimination, prejudice, and bullying on lifespan development. And as I promised you in the beginning of this class, whatever we discussed or was covered within the text, I wanted to give you practical examples of how you can see the impact of these concepts manifested in day-to-day life. And so today's lesson is going to focus just on that. The underlying current of our lesson for today is going to be rooted in concepts related to social justice. And the reason why I want to do that is because I had discussed earlier in the class this notion of connectedness, right? You remember when we discussed early in the class that we are all connected and dependent upon one another. And so when we discuss notions of hegemony, marginalization, and subjugation, as well as dominant and inferior groups, all of this has a profound impact on our sense of self, our sense of value in ourselves, our self-esteem, and ultimately how we see ourselves fitting into the world around us. Now, I just mentioned this $5 word of hegemony. Please don't be intimidated by that word. Hegemony is a social justice term that refers to the notion of a group that holds all the power within a social setting, okay? Power through resources, money, opportunities, advantages, okay, given in that social setting, and how those individuals utilize that power to stay in a position of privilege, okay? So that's what that's referring to. Marginalization is when we treat others different, groups of individuals different in society. We push them to the margins of society. So if you picture society as a blank piece of paper, a line paper, and if you know how on that line paper, you look on the left and right side, there's that red line, and on the extreme ends of those lines, that's the margins of the paper, right? So when marginalization, when we're talking about marginalization, what we are referring to is pushing folks to the outside barriers of society because they don't fit in the mainstream. That's the process of marginalization. When we talk about subjugation, subjugation is just a fancy word for subjugating, meaning pushing below individuals, pushing to a lower status in our society for whatever reasons, including race, gender, sexual orientation, size, cognitive ability, all of these good things. Don't worry. We are going to discuss that in today's lecture, okay? And so for these reasons today, we are addressing the topic of discrimination, bullying, and prejudice with a social justice lens, an application. Briefly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss social justice theory with you, and then what we'll do is I'll give you an opportunity to reflect on some of the content, the material, and then we will jump into our lesson as it relates to lifespan development. So there's a fancy picture here, right, that may be making some of you hungry of some food and some plates and people gathering around, right? So I want to use an analogy for you. When I discuss social justice, you're going to hear me utilizing the language of social justice. And I'm going to be sharing with you the theoretical orientation as it pertains to social justice. So let's step away from that for a second because I kind of want to guide you into an analogy, if you will. So I'm sure a lot of you have been to a buffet before, right? A buffet restaurant. And let's use, for the sake of this lesson today, let's use Golden Corral as a buffet analogy. Let's do that pre-COVID, right? So what do you do when you go to a buffet at Golden Corral? Well, you wait in line, to get in, and you pay your money, and then they give you a table to sit at with your party, whoever's there with you. And then what do? You get up and you go to the rows and rows of food that are available to you, and your eyes kind of light up for a second, right? And you're looking at all that food and you grab your plate. And what do you do when you're at a buffet? You say, I think I'm going to have maybe some of the vegetables, right? But I don't want any of that meat and gravy over there. Or you know what? I don't want the meat and gravy. I actually want that pasta that's over there. Or maybe I'm going to skip the pasta today and I want to start with dessert, right? Or maybe I don't want to go to dessert. I'm going to jump over to the fried food section. And whatever the case is, when you're at a buffet, what do? You pick and choose, right? What it is that you want to take up, what it is that you want to eat, what you want on your plate. right? Now, with social justice, there's a saying in our field related to social justice that you cannot take a buffet approach to social justice. You cannot pick and choose, if you're truly social justice oriented, what causes you're going to take up as just causes and what you can't. If it's unjust, then it's our responsibility in a social work setting to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And so in social justice, what that means is that if I am for racial equality, right, and I don't believe that there's such a thing as inferior races, I can't be about equal opportunity when it comes to races, but saying that I'm not for the rights of immigrants and refugees. Under a social justice approach, I can't say that I'm about the rights of immigrants and refugees, but I'm really not concerned about the rights, equal rights for women. Right? Under a social justice approach, I can't say that I'm for the equal rights of women, but you know what? I'm not really concerned about the fact that LGBTQ plus members are discriminated against. I can't say as a social justice advocate that I am for the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals, but you know what? If you have a disability or a pre-existing medical condition and you're not considered able-bodied in our society, that you're on your own. So I hope you're kind of understanding the approach here, the lens that we're going to apply today when in regards to discussing a matter of prejudice, discrimination, and bullying and its impact on us in lifespan development. So after this slide, we'll go ahead and dive into some concepts that will further illustrate social justice theory. And as we continue on with our discussion related to social justice concepts, because they fit so nicely with the discussion surrounding bullying, discrimination, and prejudice, I'd like to talk about why I selected social justice theory as an application to sort of parallel our discussion this week. So one thing is, under social justice, we are called, in fact, responsible to serve, heal, and love our neighbors, right? And that means every neighbor. So when you think about this, from birth, we are connected to another human being, right? And that is life. That is what it is. Now, even after that umbilical cord has been cut, it doesn't mean that we are no longer responsible for the well-being of one another. And so there's a saying in our field, in the helping professions, particularly within mental health and within social work, that says hurt people hurt people. And what that means is that ultimately we have to serve individuals who have been hurt by trauma, neglect, abuse, crime in their lives, right? But we also have a responsibility, if we identify as Christians, if we identify as a helping professional, to serve those who have also done the hurting. And what that ultimately means is we are called to begin to view an individual's behavior, not just as the circumstances of the behavior in that moment, but maybe what led up to the behavior that's causing them to have that sort of outburst, right? When a client yells or screams at me or calls me names, it would be easier for me to judge them, to deem them as behaving badly, or that they're being rude or defiant, without actually diving deeper into considering that maybe this individual was abused by a male. Maybe they were abused by a Hispanic male that looks like me. Maybe, in fact, I remind them of their abuser. Maybe I don't. Maybe we're starting to build a positive relationship with one another. Maybe they're feeling, they're starting to have feelings of trusting me and wanting to open up, but they're fearful that I'm going to be transferred, or I'll no longer be with the agency. And so to protect themselves, they push me away. And so oftentimes what that means is we have to begin to shift our thinking. I can't just say, well, what's that person's problem? Why don't they like me? I have to say, what may be causing that person to behave that way? And so the fact of the matter is that there's going to be injustices that occur around the world daily, right? I'm going to talk to you about discrimination, bullying, and all these kind of things. The fact of the matter is that's going around everywhere, right? And part of what our role is as a helping professional, for me as a social worker, but you in any of the helping professions, is to all work together to address the injustices that occur. And in the context of our discussion today, that's why we're focusing on discrimination, bullying, and prejudice, right? And so you'll also see examples later on in your textbooks about how specific incidents related to all of these things of discrimination and bullying impact an individual's development as they move throughout the lifespan. Okay, for a couple of minutes, what I'd like to do is add to our discussion with a little bit of an activity. Now, when I conduct this activity in class, what I literally do is I put a piece of paper that has a word on the back of, or on that paper, and we tape it to each other's backs, okay, all of us in the classroom. And then what I do is I ask all of you as students to walk around the classroom and to gather at least 5 words, stereotypes, negative stereotypes related to each of those groups, those words that are on your back. So some of the words that could be on an individual's back, there would be one, would be something like a homeless individual, someone who's an immigrant, a teenage mother, okay, a foster child, okay, things like this. And what would happen is individuals would then write a negative stereotype about that group, about that word that's on your back. At the end of the activity, what you would do is you would take that piece of paper off your back and see what has been written about you. So imagine for a second, if you will, if you kind of help me out here with your imagination, that let's say I had homeless individual, because we've discussed that in our class, right, on your back. And it's not uncommon that individuals in class will write negative stereotypes about homeless people, being that they're crazy, maybe they're dirty or smelly, they're lazy, they're drug addicts, they're all of these things, right? And as you've noticed, though, we've discussed, is that there's a lot of other factors playing into an individual finding themselves without housing other than all of those things, but that's what we quickly judge and assign to an individual without ever knowing them, right? And so this is the concept of prejudice, of when we begin to develop negative attitudes about an entire group without even knowing individuals of that group. We make an assumption, right? And so what I would ask you to consider is, if you were placed with that sort of label on your back, if you were the individual that they were talking about, identifying all those negative stereotypes about, how would that make you feel? And then think about this. When you're carrying those feelings around with you every single day of every moment, knowing that people that are looking at you are having these thoughts in your head, how does that impact your development, your emotional well-being, your cognitive well-being, right? All of that. Chances are you're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel belittled. You might feel even angry about the feelings that other people have. You might feel hopeless. You may feel so bad about yourself that you don't even want to try, right, for something better. And so what's important to understand is lifespan development, even though it sounds like this clean topic of psychology and physiology, and we put them into all these categories, emotional well-being has a direct impact on our well-being, not only who we are in the moment, but who we will become, right? And so with this activity and these questions that I've asked you to consider, that really, when we talk about prejudice and stereotyping and treating other people differently, we hear a lot of talk about that on the media, but rarely do we place ourselves in the shoes of the individuals who we are judging. Rarely do we take a moment to stop and think, what must that feel like, right, for them? Okay, and then, so thank you for playing along with that activity, and we will go ahead and dive into some further illustrations of social justice theory in the following slides. I would like to provide you with 2 formal definitions for some critical terms that we're discussing for this week's lecture regarding prejudice and discrimination. And the reason I would like to provide you with these terms is so that we have a context, a common understanding of when we discuss matters of prejudice, discrimination, or bullying, that we all have a common understanding of what these terms mean. So prejudice is defined as an often unfavorable opinion or feeling formed without knowledge or experience about a racial, ethnic, social, or religious group. Primarily about these groups that you noticed here, like it was saying, racial, ethnic, social, or religious. Now, I used an example of individuals without housing, right? And some of the negative stereotypes that exist that as a result can transform into a prejudice that an individual has towards individuals without housing. In that case, that would fall under a religious group here. Obviously, when we're talking about racist sentiments, notions of prejudice against an entire race related to negative stereotypes and beliefs, then that would be racial prejudice, right? Ethnic, depending on the origin, the country that an individual is from. And as you've seen, I'm sure, and experienced many times in media portrayals, movies, there is a significant prejudice that we hold against other religions. In addition to Christianity, depending on what part of the world that you're in, right? So if you're in a Christian-dominated country or society, you may experience that the prejudice tends to lean towards religions other than Christianity. But let's say you end up in a country where the dominant religion is Muslim, for example. Well, then Christianity may be the religion where individuals develop a prejudice against Christians. Okay, so just all within the context of what we're discussing. In regards to discrimination, discrimination is defined as the unjust or prejudicial treatment, okay, of different people based on the race, age, sex, religion, ability, size, or other societal characteristics. Quite often, students will ask me, what is the difference between the two, right? And I think that that's a valid question to ask. You're seeking to understand why these terms exist the way they are because they're used so often synonymously. So prejudice is a belief and opinion, okay? That's something that we are thinking that exists within our heads and our hearts. When we move on to discrimination, what we are doing is treating, see this prejudicial treatment, okay? Treating people different now, okay? So it's one thing to say, you know what, I have prejudice feelings against, let's say, Hispanics, right? I'm not comfortable with Latinos is one thing to say. Now, it's another thing to say, as a result of me being uncomfortable with Latinos, I do not desire to have any Latino friends. I'm not going to engage in a relationship with a Latino or a Latina. On top of that, I don't believe that Latinos or Latinas should be allowed to be in the country or within the state or whatever the case is. And you see how then, when you begin to treat an individual differently, fundamentally doing things different towards that individual or group, okay, now what you've done is engaged in discrimination, right? You are discriminating against an individual for any one or a multitude, right, of these reasons. When we move into the next slides, what I'm going to do is unpack some notions of social justice, individuals who have been champions for social justice and the mindset that they applied to social justice. I would like to briefly remind us of some critical concepts that I introduced in the beginning of our first lecture, our course introduction, week 1, right? If you can imagine that far back. And if you notice, some of these faces look familiar. I illustrated quotes from these individuals to highlight the fact that we are all connected, right, in our efforts as human beings, children of God, created in God's image and likeness, right? And so what I would like to do is remind us of some of the vision, beliefs, values of these individuals. All of these individuals here would be recognized as proponents of social justice. Dr. King, right, Mother Teresa, Maya Angelou, JFK are just some of the examples of individuals who have championed social justice in their lifetimes, right? And so I'd like to remind us of what the voices of a just society would look like. Dr. King had mentioned that we must live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. Not only notioning the connectedness of individuals to one another, but also emphasizing that we have a responsibility to one another. Our injustices will ultimately lead to the demise of all of us collectively, right? If we don't do something to right those wrongs. Maya Angelou, one of my favorite, most influential individuals that have had an impact on my life and my learning, had stated, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Social justice honors the dignity of the individual, and therefore, if you honor the dignity of an individual, you are also responsible for the words that leave your mouth and how you make those individuals feel, right? And so Maya Angelou reminds us of this obligation we have to one another through our thoughts, but also through our words. Mother Teresa had said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. One of the most beautiful things and real, I think, examples of spirituality that Mother Teresa faced later in her life, as the end of her life was approaching. Mother Teresa actually became angry at times with God. She wrote about challenges that she had in her faith because she was questioning how was it that God could place so many difficult people, difficult meaning hunger, right? So much hunger, so much pain in front of her. And she's dedicated her entire life to making those changes for the better in society, feeding those that were in need, not only of physical food, but also of dignity, and never resulting in a decrease of the poor. And at times she struggled with that personally and spiritually in her life. And finally, a couple more. JFK had said the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. That sounds similar, right, to Reverend King's notion of connectedness. Dietrich Bonhomme spoke to the notion of social responsibility. If I sit next to a madman and he drives a car into a group of innocent bystanders, I can't, as a Christian, simply wait for the catastrophe, then comfort the wounded and bury the dead. I must try to wrestle the steering wheel out of the hands of the driver. Social responsibility, that when we know an injustice is occurring, it is unethical and out of step with our Christian roots, to simply turn our head and deny that that's taking place. And finally, a few more here I just want to show you. This one by Michelle Obama, which I loved, right? As women, we must stand up for ourselves. As women, we must stand up for each other. As women, we must stand up for justice for all. This is the notion of being an ally to individuals who are oppressed, even though they're not your group. Remember, no buffet approach, standing up for injustices for all, because one person that is oppressed means all of us that are oppressed. Mahatma Gandhi taught that an eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. And what Gandhi was emphasizing here was that when we are retributive, when we are vengeful in our justice, all we're accomplishing is revenge, but not justice. And so we have to be careful in how we administer justice within our society. Bell Hooks had talked about being oppressed means the absence of choices, right? And so at times what that means is oppressed doesn't always necessarily mean that you are beaten, scourged, imprisoned for your beliefs, but it means that you don't have the same access to opportunities, to resources, to income, to promotions as others. And so that means that you have less choices than those who are privileged to move forward in life. And finally, one of my favorites from Winston Churchill, I'm a huge fan of Churchill here, is we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And just as a reminder, my ultimate hope for all of you is that you choose to engage in a helping profession, whatever you choose. If you're welcome or inquiring about social work or thinking that may be for you, then of course, I'd love to have you. But at the same time, if you're choosing any helping profession to make this world a better place, you will make a life, not only a living, for yourself. Okay, and we will pick up with some additional social justice topics such as dominant groups and isms in the next slide. Okay, so for the last few slides today, what I have done is presented a framework under the umbrella of social justice theory to apply to our discussion that we're having on prejudice, discrimination, and bullying. Um, it's important to understand that in the next few slides, and also in the second part of this lecture, one of the things that I will be discussing are some of the ways in which we discriminate against other groups within the context of American culture based off of these prejudices, okay? So we already know that the prejudices are the feelings, the thoughts that we have that are negative associated with an entire group. And we know that discrimination is how we treat people different, okay? And so now what I'd like to do is offer you additional terminology and how we discuss when we discriminate against someone based off of several aspects of their identity. What are the terms that we use to describe that, okay? So in social justice language, we refer to these categories of discriminating against others as isms, the isms, okay? So for example, when we discriminate against someone based on their age, within the context of American culture, in the past, it was primarily younger individuals, okay, discriminating against older individuals. Now, there are some caveats to that, which we will discuss later in this term when we discuss ageism in particular. But for now, let's just roll with this conventional approach here, okay? We refer to that discrimination as ageism. Ageism, when we treat someone different based on their age, all right? When we treat someone different based on their physical ability, okay? The dominant group, okay, in our culture would be those that are able-bodied, those who aren't labeled as having a disability. So when we treat someone different, we discriminate against them for their degree of physical ability. That is referred to as ableism. Being able-minded also can be treating an individual who is not the same, okay, differently because of who they are, as ableism, okay? When we refer to someone's race as a reason why we're treating them differently, we obviously know that's racism. When we treat someone different based off of their status, their class, their economic class that they come from, we refer to that as classism. And if you notice, then the dominant group associated with that would be middle or upper class in this case. When we discriminate against someone based off of their sexual orientation, primarily within our culture, heterosexual is the dominant group, right? Then we refer to that as heterosexism, okay? Well, we are applying a lens that if you're not heterosexual, you are therefore different and should be treated differently from others. That's heterosexism, right? When we talk about national origin, right? And we talk about those in this country that maybe are American born, and we treat other people differently because they are from or were born in another country. That is a context of ethnocentrism, okay? Of being ethnocentric, where we compare other people's cultural experiences, national origins to ours, and anything that is not ours is therefore less than. And then finally, when we treat someone different based off their gender, all right, in our culture, we are primarily a patriarchal society, so male dominated in this case, and what we refer to that is as sexism, and that's the terminology. So I know that this particular lecture was a little light, right, in terms of reference to lifespan development, but we needed this time to set the stage for the second part of our lecture, and so I hope that you found the information usable and helpful in developing a language around prejudice, discrimination, and bullying. And then in the next few discussions that we have on this topic, we will further dive into the impact regarding lifespan development. Okay, and finally, the moment you've been waiting for, I'd like to go ahead and end today's lesson with our centering exercise for today. So again, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your openness and engaging in all of this content. I know it's not always easy, but what I really, truly appreciate about having you all as students is the fact that you continue to come back each week and continue to push yourself cognitively, academically, and spiritually to grow in these areas. And so thank you for that. Our centering scripture verse comes from Isaiah today. And I love this particular verse, right? He gives power to the faint, abundant strength to the weak. And our focus word will be strength again, right? There's no harm in continuing to remain strong, right? Through adversity, through uncertainty, in times when we feel challenged. So let's go ahead and make sure that our hands and feet are in a nice, comfortable position. Let's make sure that we push out all of those external worries or concerns. If you are feeling weak at the moment, if you're feeling uncertain, if you are needing that boost at this point in the term, then just know that maybe the scripture verse is for you, right? To lean into your relationship with God, and to know that He's going to give you power and abundant strength, right? And allow God to speak strength into your heart in this moment. So go ahead and take that nice deep breath, close your eyes, and I will keep track of the time. Okay, go ahead and take that nice deep breath and open your eyes. Welcome back. I want to say thank you again. Thank you so much. If at any point, at this point in the term, at this point in the process, if you have questions or concerns, there I am sitting at my computer waiting, excuse me, for you to, for you to engage. And so know that just continue to check that Blackboard for your assignments, your due dates. Know that I am always here to help you and assist in any way that I can. And know that you are constantly in my thoughts and prayers. I'm praying for you all. Thank you so much for everything. And I will see you in the next part of this lecture.